So let's begin. The stock market, the S&P 500, at least as of a bit earlier this morning, was down by 8.7% year to date. Um, we were already down about 1% before the war started due to all the AI fears, the overinvestment fears in AI, the fears that AI was just going to gobble everything else up and kind of undermine the rest of the economy. That was the turbulence we were dealing with before, but the market was only down 1% as a result of that. And then the war hit, and really it's not so much the war itself. The world has experienced wars. The United States has been through wars when the market does just fine, actually. But anytime a natural resource that the world depends on, that the United States depends on, anytime there's concern that the price of that natural resource is going to go up or does go up, that's when you have bouts of market volatility. And that's what we're going through, right? So it's the price of oil which is causing the markets to really struggle. Potentially higher inflation. It means that input costs of businesses go up, and that's what really causes the turbulence. But to put this all in perspective, before I get into Trump's strategy behind the war, to put this all in perspective, if you look at the price of oil today and you adjust it for inflation, so this concept is known as the real price of oil. Uh, the real price of oil, the inflation adjusted price of oil, is essentially where it's been over the last 15 years. So if you took the price of oil 15 years ago and adjusted it for inflation, it would be the equivalent of about $100 a barrel for oil, exactly what it is today. So we're really suffering from what is known in economics is a concept called price illusion. We have this concept now that oil and the price of gasoline is so ridiculously expensive. But the truth is, if oil had just been keeping pace with inflation over the last 15 years, this is where the price of oil would be. But the truth of the matter is, oil prices up until the war have been well below, they've been increasing every year, much less than the average price of other goods and services in our economy. So we got used to fairly inexpensive oil. And now, because we had this blip, oil prices have just adjusted upwards to where they would have been otherwise had they just kept up with the overall pace of inflation. So it feels bad, and the media is actually going crazy with it. But the truth is, the price of oil is not all that high. If you were to compare it to other real oil crises that we've had, for example, in the 1970s, or in 2008, or in 2012, these are periods where we had big oil shocks. That would put the price of oil today, if you were to, look at previous oil shocks and what a real oil shock would look like, that would put the price of WTI, which is trading about $98 today, that would actually put it at close to $187. That's a real oil shock. So we're still far away from that. Uh, it's not impossible that we could get there, but I very much doubt it. But that's the reason why oil prices are, excuse me, that's the reason why the stock market is suffering so much. It's because of oil. And if we could just open up the Strait of Hormuz, which is where 20% of the global oil supply transits through, we would see a significant decline in oil price and the stock market would recover, even if the war continued. Okay. With that said, let's move on now to really the topic at hand, which is the strategy behind Trump's war on the Iranian regime. Look, if you read the media, if you just flip on the TV, or even if you listen to the top geopolitical analysts in the United States, they will tell you that the Trump team entered this war without a strategy. And there's a company called the Eurasia Group, and the Eurasia Group is responsible for providing most of Wall Street with their geopolitical analysis. There's a few other places, but Eurasia Group is the main one. It's headed by a guy by the name of Ian Bremmer, who is a adjunct professor at Columbia, but he also runs this publishing firm that does geopolitical analysis, again called the Eurasia Group. Well, I'm just using him as an example because this is his view. This is the view of the New York Times. This is the view of the Washington Post, the Financial Times, even the front cover, the front pages of the Wall Street Journal. This is the predominant view. The Trump team entered the war without a strategy. Their goals are unclear, according to this view, and the Islamic regime is still functioning after all. And if it's still functioning, and if it's still capable of firing missiles, which it does every day, fewer and fewer, but it still fires missiles every day, and if its leaders are still preaching fiery, frightening rhetoric, then the US must be failing. Now, this analysis completely misses the big picture. It misses the plot. And I want to go over Trump's strategy. Okay. And this is based on hours and hours and hours of listening to military officials that within the Trump administration, military officials within that are advising Benjamin Netanyahu. It's listening to top military analysts who have retired from the military. Listen to, this is how I spend my days, and this is how I cobble together what I believe to be is Trump's real strategy. And there are several steps to Trump's strategy. First, Trump uses what is known as coercive diplomacy. We're going to describe each one of these steps. Second, Trump moves to military pressure, or otherwise known as war. Then the next step is Trump tends to pause. He tends to pause the war. And then the fourth phase of the strategy is to once again apply military pressure or renew the war from a position of even greater strength. Because after the first phase of war, he weakened the enemy sufficiently, and now they're weaker. So when we re-engage in war, we're operating from a greater position of strength. So let's get a bit more specific. When Trump came into office last year, he demanded that the Iranian regime roll back its nuclear program, that they impose limits on their missile program, and that they dismantle their proxy network, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, that they stop funding these terrorist organizations. Now, Iran had been refusing all US presidents, right? In the past, for 2 decades, US presidents have tried to help Iran curb their behavior, and Iran refused those efforts. So Trump changed the US approach. The US approach had been one of constant diplomacy, constant negotiation, almost infinite tolerance. Trump switched to coercive diplomacy. And what is coercive diplomacy in this instance? Trump imposed sanctions on Iran. And he said, look, I'm going to penalize you economically. I'm going to sanction your oil, and maybe you'll get the message. So first he sanctioned them, and then he offered the Iranian regime a way out through negotiation. And they negotiated. They negotiated for a couple of months. But Iran refused to negotiate in good faith, meaning they refused to accept any of Trump's requests. So that policy of coercive diplomacy, coercion meaning sanctions, you penalize them and then you negotiate. Because it failed, Trump engaged in force, right? Diplomacy failed, coercive diplomacy failed. He engaged in force and he green-lighted what is now known as the 12-day war, which began in June of last year. So the 12-day war, as we know, Israel hit Iran's military and their nuclear infrastructure very hard. And this marked a shift from coercive diplomacy to military force, or you could call it open war. Now, that phase stopped after 12 days. And then Trump resorted to the third piece of the strategy. So first coercive diplomacy, then military force, then pause. That's the third part of the diplomacy. You pause. He paused because, and by the way, he did not target, or Israel didn't target the political leadership of Iran. And that was very purposeful because that 12-day war was meant to shock the regime and force them to make a choice. The pause, which is a critical part of the strategy, gives Iran's political leaders time to assess the damage that was done to them during that 12-day period and decide whether saving the political system was their priority or whether trying to maintain their capacity to threaten their neighbors was their priority. So after the pause, which lasted a few months, several months, Trump approached them again with an attempt to negotiate. And Trump was not and has never been interested in making a compromise with the regime. Trump wanted them to relinquish their nuclear weapons, to cap their ballistic missile program, and stop financing their proxy network, stop arming their proxy network, effectively to dismantle it. Now, Trump gave negotiations an ample period of time, but the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, and the other leaders that surround him, they rejected these terms. So clearly, their priority was maintaining their lethality. That is, their priority was to maintain the ability to terrorize and murder their neighbors. So that brings us to the fourth phase, right? We did the pause, negotiate. The fourth phase is Trump returns to war again. More military pressure. And the Ayatollah Khamenei was killed in the opening strike of this second war, right? The first war was the 12-day war. Now we're into the second war. And right, that just took place a few weeks ago. And the thinking there, you target Khamenei and many of the other leaders that surround him. The thinking there is if Khamenei and the other leaders were the main obstacle to the regime surrendering their desire to maintain their lethality, their ability to kill and threaten their neighbors, well, maybe if you remove him, that might create space for others inside the system to accept Trump's terms and relinquish their military ambitions. But the regime remained defiant. So even the war continued, Trump and Israel gave the leadership another window. They didn't pause striking other parts of the military apparatus, but they left the leadership, like the top of the leadership, they left them unscathed for 17 days, giving them a chance to maybe change their mind. But after 17 days, when it was clear they weren't changing their mind, they eliminated Ali Larijani, who was became the de facto leader of Iran after the Ayatollah was eliminated. So now he's gone. And now again, what is Trump doing? He seems to be entertaining the idea of, well, maybe now they'll learn. They'll see that one leader after another is being eliminated. So now Trump has turned to the head of the Iranian parliament. He is seen as perhaps, we don't really know for sure. The Trump administration obviously has more information than we do, but they seem to believe that the head of the parliament, his name is Ghalibaf. They believe that Ghalibaf is the one that is effectively calling the shots. So that's the one the Trump administration seems to be having some negotiations with. But at least so far, it appears that he's not interested either. But Trump is giving the regime a choice once again. Relinquish your offensive military capabilities, relinquish your ability to threaten and murder your neighbors, or you will lose it by force. And we've demonstrated to you that we will continue to eliminate your leadership, demolish your offensive capabilities, demolish your defensive capabilities. So this is what Trump's critics miss. Trump's approach to negotiation and his approach to war, they're not opposites. So often you hear, even on Wall Street, people saying, there he goes again. Every time he negotiates, Trump is chickening out, right? Taco, Trump always chickens out. These critics are missing the point. They do not understand the strategy. Negotiation and war are not opposites. They are successive phases of the same strategy. You see, coercive diplomacy presents the terms of what Trump wants, and he offers the possibility for a peaceful solution through these diplomatic approaches. And when they reject it, when they reject coercive diplomacy, then military force comes in right behind it, and it raises the costs of refusal, right? It makes it harder, at least in theory, for the Iranian regime to refuse the next time Trump reaches out to them to make an offer, to negotiate and surrender. It's really not negotiate, it's more surrender. So you don't have to be subjected to more military force. And the pause, Trump uses the pause, and we continue to wage war, but we pause from taking out their leaders, right? So this new leadership, this new leader, the head of the parliament, Ghalibaf, we're allowing him to live. We're giving him a choice. But if he says no, again, you can be sure that he's next on the hit list, right? But these pauses give the regime a chance to examine their losses, to test whether the regime may have altered its calculations. That's the point. So none of this is incoherence, right? The alternating between negotiation and military force, it's not incoherence. It's not Trump chickening out. It's part of the big strategy. Now, whatever happens next in this war, despite what all the critics say, Trump has already changed the balance of power in the Middle East and in the Persian Gulf. If the war ends with the fall of the regime, it's a clear-cut victory, obviously. But even if the regime survives, it will be in greatly diminished form. In less than a month, the Trump administration has achieved what 20 years of diplomacy and negotiation never achieved. An Islamic regime with its nuclear and missile programs sharply reduced and its regional reach has been smashed, right? That's what's been achieved. So either way you look at this, the status quo is over. The Iranian regime, even if it survives, it will be a small fraction of what it once was. And now Iran is isolated, completely isolated within the Middle East. All the Arab countries that appeased Iran over decades have now turned against it. Its military has been pretty much decimated. Its navy is sitting at the bottom of the sea. Its no nuclear program set back once again many years. And its economy has been smashed and will be in a tailspin for the foreseeable future. Now, anybody who expected decisive, conclusive results in days or even weeks, they simply do not understand the history of war. And they don't understand Iran, right? They're not analyzing war. They're looking at TikTok, right? They're looking at TikTok and they are living in an instant gratification world. If you listen to any real military expert, right, not the nonsense of the biased media, you'll hear that the United States and Israel have made really historic progress, right? This type of landslide in modern warfare has really never been seen before. The US and Israel have been eliminating regime leaders, both political leaders and military leaders, right? We have degraded Iran's ability to project power beyond its borders. We have dramatically reduced their missile and drone stockpiles, especially their missile stockpiles. And we have decimated their capacity to produce more drones and missiles. Now, destroying Iran, the Iranian regime, uh, it also must include stopping Iran from threatening the Strait of Hormuz, right? This is absolutely critical. But before we get to the Strait of Hormuz, right, which still needs to be dealt with, I want to take a look. I made the case that people who criticize and thought we could get a conclusive win in the matter of a couple of weeks, they don't understand war. I want to go over modern warfare a little bit and make this crystal clear, this point crystal clear. So the US and Israel began striking Iran on February 28th. So we are 27 days into this war. And as I said, many think that because the war isn't over, we're losing. But war does not operate on the timelines of social media. So let's take a quick look at some modern wars and see how long they lasted. So the Korean War lasted from 1950 to 1953, so 3 years, which is 1,125 days. Okay, again, we're 27 days into this war. When we removed a dictator from Panama, and we didn't just pluck him out like we plucked out Maduro, it wasn't so simple. We had to go to war and we had to defeat the Panamanian army, which relative to the Iranian army was a joke. But that war, which took place in 1989 and 1990, that lasted 41 days. Okay. So that was the shortest war in modern history. Uh, the next war took place in Bosnia, where the United States was involved with. And these are all fairly successful wars. That war lasted between 1995 and 2004. It took 9 years, and all of NATO was involved in that war as well. Um, During that same period, it was a separate war, but we fought a war in Kosovo. And we also built a pretty big alliance. That was in 1999. It lasted 78 days. We had a war in Libya in 2011. That war lasted 7 months or 220 days. The first Persian Gulf War between 1990 and 91, that was purely an air campaign. And it only lasts, excuse me, this one also is super short. It lasted 40 days. But it took place, what led up to it was a 5 month military buildup. Okay, so it took months and months and months of preparation. It was fought from the air and it lasted 40 days. Then uh, in the late 80s, in 87 and 88, the United States got involved in the Iran-Iraq war. And that's when we had to escort oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. That lasted 14 months. So we've been at this 27 days. If you measure this by any of these other wars, and this is a serious war, right? We allowed Iran to develop huge capabilities over decades. To think that this could be ended in a matter of weeks, and it will be ended in a matter of weeks, but not the super tiny timeline that the media wanted, or they probably didn't want it. This is exactly what they wanted to stretch out now, longer and longer and longer, so they can continue to blast Trump. But this has been a very short-lived war so far. Now, what's really taking so long here, or not so long, again, the big problem, the sticking point here is the Strait of Hormuz. And you'll have people say over and over again, when they say Trump had no strategy, and then they pinpoint the Strait of Hormuz, because the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, they argue, clearly we didn't prepare for this. Well, I can tell you, I have been involved in my work with the CIA. I've been to many wargaming exercises. Well, I don't know about many, but I'd say probably about four. And I've been in the room with top military brass. I didn't say much because I don't have much to offer when it comes to wargaming, but I kept my mouth shut and paid attention. And what I noticed in any war game that involved the Persian Gulf, what was the first thing that Iran did? They closed the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so I started going to war game exercises. I don't remember the exact year. It was in the very early 2000s. And I went to, I'd say, four of them between 2000 and 2008. And in each one of those war game exercises, the first thing Iran did was close the Strait of Hormuz. So the chances that the Trump government did not see this coming, you never want to say zero probability. This one is a zero probability. And by the way, this is my thinking. And subsequently, I've heard plenty of other military analysts say the same thing. There's zero chance the Trump administration did not plan for this. So the Iranian regime keeps digging in their heels. And because they have managed to wreak havoc on the global oil market, somehow they seem to have convinced themselves that they might be winning. And I don't doubt it. This is something you hear. Iran actually thinks they're winning. And because they're all sort of living in bunkers and the communication between all the different groups of government is so broken down, they haven't really been able to do much of a damage assessment. So they might think because oil prices are high and because the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed, and because they do read the US media on the internet, and the US media keeps saying we're losing, they may be under the impression that they're losing. But something interesting just happened, which is the IRGC announced that they lowered the minimum age for service in the IRGC to 12 years old. So that is not typically a sign that things are going well for Iran. There's this saying that I've heard, which I think is appropriate. Sometimes you run across someone that, the more someone loses an arm and then they lose an a leg, the more they think it's just a scratch, right? So it's very conceivable that they're losing their arms and their legs and they think it's just a scratch and they don't understand how badly they're being damaged. Um, and they continue to play rope-a-dope, right? They think that, especially when they read our media and able to keep oil prices high, they're Muhammad Ali fighting George Foreman, just absorbing blow after blow after blow, and they're causing chaos in the Strait of Hormuz, and they've convinced themselves they're winning. Now, there's no doubt if we're going to win this war, if we're going to come out on top, the Strait of Hormuz must open. And the flip side of that, the only way we can win is by opening up the Strait of Hormuz. The flip side of that is, at this point, Iran only has one weapon that's capable of damaging us. They are a one-trick pony. They have nothing else. What is their one weapon? The Strait of Hormuz. They have nothing else. It's what's causing the U.S. stock market to decline. It's what's causing if people are getting frustrated in the United States, it's because the price to fill up their car has gone up, right? And once we solve that problem, we deprive them of their only weapon that can hurt us and fatigue us. So, what does it take to clear the Strait of Hormuz, and how far away are we away from taking away their only weapon? Well, what it takes is we have to continue. There's really uh, four military components that we need to degrade further because we're degrading them. We need to further demolish their drone capability. They continue to have the capacity to shoot drones at oil tankers. We have to continue to crush their speedboats, which they're like suicide boats. They can either smash into oil tankers or they can fire missiles. Then we have to further demolish their missile launching capability. Okay. We're being effective in all of these. And then finally, we need to sweep any mines that may have been dropped, right? We heard these stories several weeks ago that they dropped 12 mines. Is it true? Is it not true? At this point, I think there's a lot of suspicion, or more than suspicion, that they have dropped mines. The number of mines that they've dropped, somewhat unclear. That hasn't been reported lately. But we are slowly eroding their capabilities to fire at our ships. Once this process is complete, then we can begin convoy operations. That is, we can begin escorting oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. And now we have something like 30 or 40 countries that have agreed to facilitate this process and send their warships to help with these convoy operations. Now, how long is this all going to take? Again, based on everything that I've been listening to, we probably have 7 to 10 days more of air campaign, of decimating their missiles and their drones and their speedboats, right? It's another 7 to 10 days from now. Then it would take another 7 days of minesweeping. So we're somewhere between 2 to 3 weeks away from beginning these convoys, escorting these oil tankers through. Once that begins, once that first oil tanker or first couple oil tankers start going through the Strait of Hormuz, and I want to say this is not risk-free, but it's managed risk, right? We can't guarantee that one of the oil tankers or one of the ships, won't get hit with a drone. But it's a managed risk that we've taken before. We did this again in the late 80s, and it's a risk we're going to take again because it's their only weapon they have left. So once that happens, you can expect oil prices to begin to decline and the stock market, really begin to recover. Now, I'm not saying we won't see the stock market possibly recover before then, but once investors see the light at the end of the tunnel, that's when and really the light again at the end of the tunnel is really the oil market. Investors, they could care less. The Russia-Ukraine war has been going on, for years. No one cares because it's not putting oil prices higher. The same thing. We fought plenty of wars. As long as it's not disrupting the price of oil, the markets look past it. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of how this war might conclude. Trump has basically three options for how to conclude this war. Option number one is he can continue with the current direction, right? And continue to wage war and also periodically offer a negotiated outcome for the Iranian regime. Constantly be looking for people that he can deal with, right? While hammering away, as we've been doing. If that's what he does and he ultimately finds a person or a group of people that are willing to effectively surrender, that's a big victory for the United States. Yes, it may leave a rump regime in place, but it will not be a dangerous rump regime. And it also will open up space for the opposition to rise up. Because you can be sure one of Trump's requests or one of his demands will be you can no longer shoot on protesters. So that gives space for protesters to rise up. And if they do shoot on protesters, you can be sure Israel is going to have the green light to come in and hit the IRGC very hard. And maybe the US would assist with that. Hard to know. But that would certainly be a win. So that's one option for Trump. Look for a negotiated outcome with someone within the regime who's willing to be more reasonable. Another option, option number two, would be just to declare the war's over. We win. A unilateral call. We did it. I don't care what anyone else says. We win. And you leave. And you do it without clearing the Strait of Hormuz, right? In option number one, we've cleared the Strait of Hormuz. Option number two is we just walk away and we leave the Strait of Hormuz in their hands. And that's a possibility, right? And I think a lot of people in the market think that's what's going to happen. And that's when they say taco, right? Trump always chickens out. Now, this actually is the path that everybody wants. It's the path, when I say everybody, I don't mean you guys, I don't mean me, but the New York Times wants it, CNN wants it, right? Trump walked away, he created a mess, he didn't even take back the Strait of Hormuz, it's still in Iran's hands. The markets would like it because at least it's over, right? The sooner the better. And oil prices would decline because we walked away. Iran still has the Strait of Hormuz, but they want to get their economy going again. So they would open up the Strait of Hormuz and they could say they won. But if the regime stays in power, this regime, and we didn't change their behavior at all, they will rebuild. They will rebuild. And yes, the markets would recover, but this would be asking for a disaster uh, down the road. So I don't think that's going to happen. Marco Rubio understands that would be a disaster. Trump understands that would be a disaster. So I think we can rule that scenario out. Trump knows that his mark in history will be determined mostly by the outcome of this war. And he does not want to go down in history as the one who chickened out. He had Iran hanging by a thread and he let them survive. So I don't think that's the outcome. The third possibility is we keep pounding and we keep pounding and we keep pounding. And Iran keeps refusing to negotiate. They continue to refuse to see that they're losing. They continue to be the guy who's losing an arm and losing both legs, and they think it's just a scratch. And we hit them harder and harder and harder until we call the people into the streets and this regime collapses. So I think we're either in option number one or option number three. Now, option number one, the dilemma there is there still seems to be no one to talk to, right? No one to talk to. And will we have someone to talk to or not? Impossible to know. So for now, despite the fact that Trump keeps telling us we're talking, we're negotiating, and they desperately want a deal, I think there really isn't that. I could be wrong, right? I could be off here. I certainly don't have the information to know with an enormous degree of confidence that there's really no one to talk to. I suspect what Trump is offering them the possibility, he's giving them an off-ramp, but he's also buying time, right? By telling the markets that we're talking. He is trying to keep a lid on oil prices. He's trying to keep a bottom, the bottom from falling out of the stock market. And he's basically playing with human psychology, with market psychology. But at the same time, he is offering them an off-ramp. I just think there's no one really to talk to. But ultimately, there might be, right? A week from now, 2 weeks from now, the harder they get hit, it does become a bit more likely that they'll open up their eyes. Now, in the next few days, could be today, could be tomorrow, could be Saturday, 4,500 Marines will be arriving to the region, and the 82nd Airborne Division, that's 1,000 paratroopers, will be arriving to the region. What are they up to? There's all kinds of hypotheses. Are they going to seize Kharg Island, at least temporarily, to try to deprive Iran of their oil revenues? That's where, most of Iran's oil gets exported from Kharg Island. Um, are they going after Iran's enriched uranium, right? There's still some enriched uranium in Iran. Um, this certainly gives Trump a whole new set of options. Now, what they're not going to do, I can tell you, they're not going to take territory and attempt to hold it. Because if they take territory, a lot of times you hear people say they're going to take over Kharg Island and hold it. The military experts that I've listened to say that's not going to happen because then you're really at risk of losing a lot of human life. Because Iran can fire drones, they can fire missiles. So taking territory and holding it is probably not in the cards here. What is in the cards are quick, short-term operations to do something big. And we will find out about it, I suppose, in the next few days. And if it's super, super secret, we may not find out about what exactly they did until after the war is over. But in any way, bottom line here is very few people understand uh, how successful this war has been waged up until now. Very few people understand what Trump's true strategy is here. And very few people understand that in all likelihood, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to start to see oil flow through the Strait of Hormuz, which will be a very positive development for both the oil market and the stock market. So we are in very important days, very important weeks. We still have some turbulence to go, probably in the short run. But as we look a bit further out, we should expect to see some pretty some real improvement in the headlines.